Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon. The ballroom was alive with chatter. 1,000 conversations buzzed, people exchanging glances, secrets, and business cards in an elegant dance of power. But in the corner of the room, where the crystal chandelier light didn't quite reach, sat a woman who didn't belong. She had been here for 2 hours and still didn't belong. Her sari, a faded shade of orange with intricate gold threading, clung to her thin frame. It looked out of place among the polished black tie suits and designer dresses. The rich hues of velvet, satin, and silk on the other guests contrasted sharply with the simplicity of her outfit. She sat at the far end of the table, unnoticed at first, but as the evening wore on, the whispers began. Her hands trembled under the table, not because of fear. Anger was what sparked the shaky grip. She didn't belong here. She had known that the moment she'd walked through the grand, marble doors of the luxury hotel. The laughter, the gossip, the clinking of wine glasses. It all felt foreign to her. She could feel it, in the way the guests moved around her, in the way their eyes slid over her like she was invisible. She could hear the quiet judgments in their stares. No one had asked her name. No one had offered to introduce themselves. She was nothing more than an extra in a movie she had never auditioned for. The server, a young man in his 20s, had just walked past her. His eyes didn't meet hers. He was here for the guests with gold cards in their hands, not the woman in the cheap sari. Without even looking at her, he moved on. She was nothing. The seat she had taken was at the far end of the table, where the light was dim, and the shadows of the high-backed chairs surrounded her like a prison. There was a slight shift in the air as a voice cut through the hum of conversation. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp, enough to draw attention. The woman sitting 2 seats to her left turned to her, her lips curving into something that wasn't a smile. "Did you sew that yourself?" The woman's voice was light, almost too sweet, like honey laced with poison. The other guests at the table stiffened, some glancing over, waiting for her to respond. The woman's fingers clenched around the napkin in her lap, her knuckles turning white. Her breath caught in her throat, but she said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that saying something wouldn't help. There was a quiet chuckle. Then another. The woman who had spoken leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, glancing around as if waiting for the others to share in her little joke. Her eyes sparkled with a cruel glint as she added, "It's quite charming, really." "Charming," the man sitting next to her scoffed. "I think it's quaint. Really puts the rest of us to shame, doesn't it?" More laughter, quieter this time, but it was there, lingering in the air like smoke. The woman's stomach twisted. She felt small. Ridiculously small. Her throat tightened. She was surrounded by people she didn't know, people who didn't care to know her. She had come here for a reason, a very important reason. But that reason seemed meaningless now. All her resolve, all the plans she had made to survive in a world like this, were slipping away with every mocking glance. Her eyes darted across the room, the laughter growing louder. It wasn't just at her now. It was the entire room that had decided to participate. The woman across from her continued, her voice a low purr. "I wonder if they're still waiting for their invitation to the real event. You know, the one with the real guests." Her words cut through the air like a blade. The sound of plates clinking and the murmur of other conversations faded into the background as the woman's gaze flickered to the others at the table. None of them had spoken. None of them had stood up to stop it. Not one person had said anything to put an end to the cruel jokes. Her fingers curled around the glass of water in front of her, but she didn't drink. She couldn't. The liquid felt like it might slip through her fingers if she tried. Another voice joined in, this time the deep baritone of a man who had been half listening. "She's probably the cleaner's +1. Or maybe the help's friend." The laughter was louder now. A few people even started snickering under their breath. It was as though the room had decided, in unison, that she didn't belong. That she wasn't worthy of their attention, their respect. But she held her ground. She refused to look down at her lap, where her hands clenched tightly around the napkin. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her retreat. The conversation was about her now, though it didn't feel like it. The words floated over her like she wasn't even in the room. One person whispered loudly enough for the others to hear, "Should we call security? I mean, this is a private event, and it's getting awkward." Her face flushed. She could feel the heat creep up her neck. The world felt like it was closing in on her. She wasn't just a nobody. She wasn't just an outsider anymore. To them, she was a problem. Then something changed. A shadow passed over the table. The room grew colder. The laughter died away. The atmosphere shifted from light-hearted cruelty to something far more ominous. The sound of footsteps cut through the silence. Slow, deliberate, commanding. A man entered the room. His presence didn't just fill the space, it owned it. Every person at the table stopped speaking. It was as if the air had frozen, as though the atmosphere itself held its breath. He walked with purpose, his dark navy suit fitting him perfectly. No tie, but the cut of the fabric made it clear that he wasn't just anyone. His jaw was strong, his eyes focused, but there was something behind his gaze, something that felt intense and unyielding. He didn't smile. He didn't greet anyone. His eyes scanned the room quickly, and then they stopped. They stopped on her. She felt his gaze like a physical weight on her chest. She didn't know why, but in that moment, everything seemed to fall silent. The whispers stopped. The air felt too heavy. Her heart skipped a beat. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he walked slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. He stopped just beside her, close enough that she could feel the faintest whisper of his presence. And then, he spoke. "Why is my wife crying?" His voice was calm. Too calm. It cut through the stillness, each word landing like a blow. The woman at the table, who had mocked her so cruelly, looked as though she had just swallowed something bitter. The others shifted uneasily in their seats. The woman's breath caught. Her heart pounded. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But she knew. She knew that the moment the words left his lips, everything had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just the woman in the wrong outfit at the wrong table. Now, everyone was watching. Everyone was waiting. And she had no idea what was coming next. The silence that followed his question was suffocating. It wrapped around the room, making every breath feel too loud, too forced. The woman at the table, the one who had mocked her so cruelly, was staring at the man as if she had just seen a ghost. The others shifted nervously in their seats, suddenly aware of the situation they had just found themselves in. The woman sitting closest to her, the one who had made the comment about her sorry, flinched as the man's gaze sharpened, then shifted to her. His eyes were not the kind that invited questions. His eyes were the kind that demanded answers. For a moment, everything was still. The only sound in the room was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. She could feel the weight of his stare on her, even though she dared not look up at him. Her heart raced, her palms clammy. She hadn't cried. Not yet. But the way his presence seemed to settle over her, it felt like he had just peeled away the last layer of protection she had been holding onto. And then he spoke again, his voice carrying across the room, still as calm as it had been before. "Why is my wife crying?" The words were simple, but they felt like a punch. There was no anger in his voice, no fury, but something more dangerous. There was the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need to raise their voice to command attention. Someone whose mere presence was enough to demand respect. The room went even colder. The laughter that had once filled the space, the idle chatter, everything disappeared, swallowed by the force of his words. It felt as though the entire room held its collective breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The woman's hands, still trembling, were clenched so tightly around the edge of her napkin that the fabric was starting to tear. She felt a knot form in her stomach. This wasn't the way it was supposed to happen. This wasn't the way it was supposed to end. She had come here to escape, to get away from the people who treated her as if she were invisible, as if her presence didn't matter. But now, with him standing there, all the focus was on her. On her and what had just happened in this room. The woman who had mocked her was the first to speak. Her voice trembled slightly, despite the confident front she had tried to put up. I don't know what you mean. You were just what? His words were clipped, and he didn't give her a chance to finish her sentence. Mocking my wife? Humiliating her? The woman at the head of the table, the one who had made the comment about her being the cleaners plus one, shifted uncomfortably. We didn't mean any harm, she said, her voice a little too high-pitched, as if she was trying to make herself sound innocent. It was just a joke. We didn't realize. The man's gaze was ice. A joke? You thought it was funny? His voice was rising now, and even though he wasn't yelling, the anger was undeniable. You thought it was funny to belittle someone who doesn't have your money, your status, your privilege? No one said anything after that. No one dared. The man turned back to her, his gaze softer now, but still sharp. Are you all right? She blinked. She hadn't realized that the tears were already beginning to fill her eyes. They weren't tears of shame. They were tears of something else, something she hadn't felt in so long. It was as though his presence, the way he had defended her without even knowing her, had shattered something inside her. She nodded quickly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But she didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. She wasn't sure if she was angry or relieved. But more than that, she wasn't sure what was happening. How had he known? Why had he come? And who was he, really? The man's voice softened again, almost as if he was speaking to himself. I don't care who you are or what you think of me. But if you ever disrespect my wife again, his eyes flicked to the rest of the table, locking onto each person in turn. I'll make sure you regret it. There was no need for him to say more. His words hung in the air like a threat, as heavy and suffocating as the silence that followed. For a moment, no one spoke. The tension was unbearable. The woman felt as though the walls were closing in on her, the weight of the situation pressing down with every passing second. And then, he turned back to her, his expression softening again. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. We're leaving. Now. The woman's heart skipped a beat. She had known he was going to say that, but hearing it aloud was something entirely different. She stood up, her legs trembling slightly, but she forced herself to steady them. She couldn't let him see how fragile she felt. She didn't want him to think she was weak. But as they turned to leave the room, the other guests began to murmur among themselves. The woman could hear snippets of their conversations, whispers, judgments, and, for the first time that night, something that sounded like regret. She caught the eye of the woman who had mocked her earlier, and for a split second, there was something there, something almost like shame in the woman's gaze. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same cold indifference that had been there before. The man kept his hand on her shoulder as they walked toward the exit. His touch was reassuring, steady, as though he had already decided that this was his fight, and she didn't have to carry it. As they reached the door, the woman hesitated, looking over her shoulder at the room one last time. She felt the weight of the stares, judgment, pity, confusion. But she didn't care anymore. She turned away from them, leaving behind the people who had humiliated her. She was leaving behind the life she had never belonged to. The world of wealth and privilege, where the rich made the rules and everyone else was invisible. But as she stepped into the hallway, a thought crossed her mind, something that she had been trying to ignore, trying to push away. Who was he? And why had he come for her? The man didn't say anything as they walked down the corridor, the heels of their shoes clicking against the marble floor. He didn't look at her, but she could feel his presence beside her, strong and unyielding. When they reached the elevator, he pressed the button, and they stood in silence. She wanted to ask him who he was, but the words wouldn't come. There was something about him that made her nervous, something she couldn't put her finger on. He wasn't just anyone. And yet, he had defended her. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped inside. The man pressed the button for the top floor. She looked up at him, finally gathering the courage to ask, "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a deep breath, as though weighing something in his mind. Then he turned to her, his gaze steady and calm. "Let's just say," he said, his voice low, "I'm someone who knows what it's like to be underestimated." The elevator doors closed, and they ascended in silence. But in the quiet, the woman couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The elevator hummed softly as it ascended. The walls, mirrored to reflect the passengers, felt oppressive. The woman stood in the corner, her back pressed against the cool metal, while the man stood beside her. His presence was a heavy, palpable force that filled the small space, yet he said nothing. His silence was as unsettling as the tension that radiated from him. She couldn't shake the questions. Her mind raced, running in circles, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The humiliation. The way the entire room had turned on her, only to be suddenly shut down by this stranger who had walked in like he owned the place. She had no idea who he was, what he was doing there, or why he had come to her rescue. But the biggest question of all burned in her chest: why? Why had he stood up for her? The elevator chimed as it reached the top floor, and the doors slid open with a soft swoosh. The man stepped out without a word, and she followed, almost in a daze. The plush carpet beneath their feet muffled their steps, and the lights in the hallway were dim, adding to the air of quiet mystery. The floor felt deserted, no staff, no guests milling about. Just a hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. He turned down a narrow corridor and walked with purpose. She had to move quickly to keep up with his long strides. Her breath was shallow, her mind still spinning. Every part of her screamed to ask him who he was, but something held her back. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, even though he wasn't looking directly at her. The silence between them was suffocating. It was as though she were trapped in some strange, unspoken agreement. He didn't want to talk. And she wasn't sure if she was ready to hear what he had to say. Finally, they arrived at a large, heavy door at the end of the hallway. He didn't knock. Instead, he reached into his pocket, produced a key card, and swiped it across the reader. The door clicked open. Without a word, he entered the room, and she followed him inside. The moment they stepped over the threshold, she felt the change. The air inside the suite was thick with tension, but it was different from the suffocating atmosphere outside. Here, there was a sense of control. The man walked across the spacious room, the large windows overlooking the city skyline. He didn't glance back as he approached a bar cart in the corner, pouring 2 drinks without asking. She stood still, unsure what to do next. The suite was luxurious, elegantly furnished, with dark wood accents and plush furnishings. A large painting hung on the wall, but it did nothing to soften the coldness of the space. Everything about it felt too polished, too calculated. He handed her one of the glasses. She hesitated for a moment before accepting it. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was just that everything about this situation felt wrong, strange. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice coming out softer than she had intended. The question had been gnawing at her since the moment they'd stepped into the elevator. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a sip from his own glass, eyes steady on hers. The look in his eyes was almost calculating, as if he was trying to decide something, deciding how much to reveal, how much to keep hidden. "I don't want anything from you," he said after a long pause. His voice was measured, low. "I just didn't like what I saw back there." His words were simple, but there was something deeper to them. He was playing his cards close to his chest, and it was driving her mad. "You didn't like it," she repeated, her tone a little sharper now. "So you came to my rescue?" He didn't flinch at the sarcasm. Instead, he nodded. "Yes. That's about the size of it." The woman took a small sip from her glass, feeling the warmth of the liquor spread through her chest. It was soothing, in a way. But it didn't answer her questions. "Why? Why did you help me?" she asked again, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. The man set his glass down with deliberate care, then turned to face her fully. He stepped closer, and she took a small step back without thinking. The intensity in his eyes was almost overwhelming. He didn't speak immediately, as though searching for the right words. When he did finally speak, it was in a low, steady voice. "I know what it's like to be overlooked. To be dismissed because of who you are or where you come from. I've seen it. And I won't stand for it." Her heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected that answer. She had expected something more elusive, more cryptic. But this was different. "Overlooked?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What does that mean?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It means, I see you. I know what they were doing to you in there. And I know how it feels to be nothing more than a token. A decoration in someone else's world." Her throat tightened. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding back until now, how deeply the insults had cut. They had hurt in a way she hadn't allowed herself to admit. She had always told herself that the judgments didn't matter, that the cruelty didn't matter. But hearing him say it, hearing him speak so plainly about what had happened, it was like he had unlocked something inside her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Her voice trembled slightly. "Because you need to understand," he said softly. "You need to understand that you don't have to be anyone's punching bag. You don't have to let them get away with treating you like you're less than them." She took another sip of her drink, trying to steady her nerves. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She had been humiliated in front of so many people. People who had laughed at her, ridiculed her. She had been so small in that room, so powerless. But here, with him, she was different. She felt a strange sense of safety. But it wasn't just that. There was something more, a connection, a pull that she couldn't explain. "So, who are you?" she asked again, her voice trembling slightly. The man paused, his expression hardening for a moment. Then he sighed, as if giving in to something he had been trying to avoid. "My name is Michael Blackwood," he said, his voice steady now. "I don't expect you to know who I am. Most people don't. But I know what it's like to be underestimated, to be treated as if you're invisible. I've had my share of difficulties in the past." She studied him carefully. Michael Blackwood. The name didn't ring any bells. But there was something about the way he said it, something that made her think it wasn't just a name. "You're not like them," she said, more to herself than to him. "No," he agreed, his voice dark. "I'm not." The silence between them stretched. She felt a sudden surge of courage. Maybe it was the way he had stood up for her. Or maybe it was the way he spoke about being invisible, being underestimated. Whatever it was enough to make her ask the question she had been avoiding. "Why are you here? Really? What do you want from me?" His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, she wondered if she had gone too far. But then his lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm not here to take anything from you," he said softly. "I'm here because I know what you're capable of. And I think you have more power than you realize. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Power? Yes, he said firmly. But the question is, what will you do with it? The weight of his words settled heavily in her chest. Power? She had never felt powerful in her life. She had always felt small, insignificant, like a shadow in the background of a world that didn't care. But now, in this room, with him standing in front of her, she didn't feel small anymore. She felt like something was about to change. The morning after the events of the night before, the room was quiet. Too quiet. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The woman, still processing the events from the night before, stood at the large window, staring out at the city skyline. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a warm orange glow over the horizon. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a mirage. Her mind raced with questions that had no answers. Michael Blackwood. The man who had come into her life like a storm, offering help, then disappearing just as quickly. She had wanted to know who he was, why he had done what he did. But now, as the sunlight filtered through the curtains, she realized that some answers weren't meant to be found. Some truths were too painful to confront. The night had ended in silence. After their conversation, after Michael had revealed who he was, they had both retreated into their respective corners. He had given her space, allowed her to process, but his presence had lingered in the room like an unspoken promise. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him than he had let on. More that he wasn't telling her. There was a soft knock at the door, breaking the silence. She didn't need to ask who it was. She already knew. "Come in," she called, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. The door opened slowly, and Michael entered. He didn't look like he had spent the night in the same hotel. There was no hint of fatigue in his eyes, no dishevelment in his appearance. He looked the same as he had the night before, polished, composed, unreadable. "Good morning," he said, his tone calm and measured. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she studied him closely. There was something in his gaze, something that made her wonder if he was trying to say more than he was letting on. Or maybe it was just that he was so enigmatic, so distant that it was hard to tell what he was thinking. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" she finally asked, her voice more forceful than she had intended. Michael's lips quirked into a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What do you mean?" "You know what I mean," she replied, turning away from the window to face him. "Last night, I did what needed to be done," he interrupted, his voice cool. "I told you I wouldn't stand by and let them humiliate you." She wasn't satisfied with that answer. "But why? Why did you do it? What do you want from me?" Michael took a step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "I've told you, I don't want anything from you." She shook her head, her frustration growing. "But you're not telling me everything. I know you're hiding something." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not hiding anything," he said, his tone suddenly serious. "But I think it's time you knew the truth." Her heart skipped a beat. The truth. She had known, deep down, that he was holding something back. The question was, what was it? "What truth?" she asked, her voice quieter now, filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. Michael's eyes softened, and for the first time since she had met him, he seemed almost vulnerable. "I'm not just anyone, you know. I'm not just some stranger who decided to help you because I felt like it." She stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. She was starting to feel like she was standing on the edge of something, a precipice. But she wasn't sure whether she should step forward or turn back. "I've been in your shoes," Michael continued, his voice low. "I've been looked down on, ignored, treated like I didn't matter. And I made a promise to myself that I would never let anyone feel the way I felt. I wouldn't let anyone be treated as less than they are. The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, but still, there was something more. She felt it in the pit of her stomach, the sense that he wasn't telling her everything. I don't understand, she admitted, taking a step toward him. If you've been in my shoes, then why are you hiding? Why won't you tell me who you really are? Michael's expression hardened again, the walls that he had let down just a moment ago now going back up. I can't tell you everything. Not yet. But I'll tell you this, you're not alone in this. She wanted to press him further, to demand more answers, but something in his voice stopped her. The tone wasn't just firm, it was filled with a quiet desperation. There was more to him than he was letting on, more than he was willing to share. Why are you here? She asked again, this time more softly, almost pleading. He looked away, his gaze distant, as though he were lost in thought. Then, slowly, he spoke. I'm here because I owe you something. A debt that I didn't even know existed until last night. The words hung in the air, heavy and cryptic. She didn't know what he meant, but she could tell that whatever it was, it had the power to change everything. What debt? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael didn't respond immediately. Instead, he moved toward the desk in the corner of the room, his movements deliberate. He picked up a small, unmarked envelope from the surface and turned back to face her. This, he said, holding it out to her. This is why I'm here. She took the envelope from his hands, feeling the weight of it, the finality in the gesture. Her hands shook slightly as she tore it open, revealing a single sheet of paper. She read the words quickly, her eyes scanning the lines. And then it hit her. The truth. The names. The signatures. The dates. Her heart stopped. It was a legal document. A contract, of sorts. But the names weren't just any names. They were her family's names. Names she had never seen in such a context before. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling as she looked up at Michael, who was now standing just a few feet away. Why do you have this? I've been searching for you, he said, his voice steady but with a tinge of emotion. And I think it's time you knew who I really am. He paused, letting the silence stretch between them. I'm your brother. She blinked, unable to process the words. Her brother. She had never known she had one. No family member had ever mentioned him. And yet here he was, standing before her, holding a document that could shatter everything she had known about her past. What are you talking about? She whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Michael's eyes were filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. I've spent years trying to find you. After what happened, after everything that was taken from our family. I needed to find you. To make things right. She couldn't breathe. Her chest felt tight as she tried to comprehend the enormity of what he was saying. It didn't make sense. How could he be her brother? I don't remember any of this, she said, the tears starting to well up in her eyes. I don't remember any of it. Why didn't anyone tell me? There were things, Michael began, his voice cracking slightly, things that couldn't be told. Not until you were ready. Her head was spinning. The truth, the real truth, had been hidden from her. Her entire life, her struggles, her pain, had been based on a lie. And now, here was Michael, the man who had come to her aid, revealing a truth that changed everything. The room felt like it was closing in on her, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse. But then Michael stepped forward, his hand gently touching her arm, grounding her. I know this is a lot to take in, he said softly. But I'm here now. I won't leave you again. Her mind was reeling, but one thing was clear, everything was different now. Her life, her identity, her very sense of self, everything had just shifted. And the only thing she could do was face it, no matter how overwhelming the truth might be. And for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope.